This is A Voice, a podcast with Dr. Gillian Kayes and Jeremy Fisher.
This is A Voice.
Aisling sent a question in on our speakpipe.com/vocal process link, and she says this.
Hi there. I have a question about use of the straw in and out of water. When we use it in water, we blow into it and we have these bubbles in the water, which I'm aware is good for a tired voice. But when we take away that water and are just using the straw alone, how much air do you think should leave the straw, if any? And should we be actively blowing out that straw during phonation, or just allowing a little bit of air through, or no air? And are there benefits to exploring this spectrum? Thank you so much, and I'm really looking forward to the podcast.
That's quite a question.
It's a great question,
Yeah,
actually, because I have had conversations with clinicians where they've maybe said, well, it's all very well blowing in water, but what happens when you come out of the water and you take the straw away? Over to you.
Yes.
Please answer in 30 words or less.
Oh, wow. Yes, it makes a difference using straw and not using straw. No, that's not correct. Well, I mean, it does make a difference if you use a straw and not a straw, but it makes a difference between if you use water and not water as well.
Yep.
Okay. So this is actually something that I've kind of learnt and explored in conversation with the Dr. Vox guys. And in essence, when you use a straw with water, you are creating what we call AC back pressure. And so this is just an electronics term, alternating current of back pressure.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And that is to do with the fact that as you're creating these bubbles, you're only letting out pockets of air at a time. So there's not a consistent flow of air outwards. And as you let out pockets of air at a time, the pressure is inconsistent also in its escape. And we know from Pascal's law, now it's a little bit different because Pascal's law talks about closed systems, but it works in this instance. But Pascal's law basically is any change in pressure will propagate through the entire system equally. And so you can see that as you're letting little pockets of air pressure out, you're sometimes letting out high pressure, then sometimes low pressure, high pressure, low pressure, high pressure, low pressure. Okay. And so when that gets translated back to the vocal tract, the pressure is expanding and contracting the tissue surfaces as that pressure wave kind of moves across, which is how, and this is kind of the underpinning of how everybody kind of describes this massage-like effect.
So it's similar to compression and rarefaction, isn't it? Can
I just, because I just had an image of what you were talking about. So you're blowing down the straw into water, and the air that you're blowing down pushes the water away from the straw, forms a bubble, and then when the bubble is released, the water then pushes back, so that you're constantly doing a backwards and forwards against the water. Once you take the straw out of the water, you wouldn't have the backwards and forwards push because it's just external air pressure.
So it's mirroring what's happening at vocal fold level in relation to the air in the vocal tract, isn't it?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. One of the key points about using it with water, though, is actually the angle of the straw also makes a difference.
Ooh.
So if the angle,
Lovely.
so if the straw is like directly down, impacting the surface of that water, this is a harder task because you have to displace essentially a greater depth of water consistently.
Yes.
If you angle that water, say 45 degrees, part of that escape of air is easier because it's slightly above the other, and the pocket of air that is escaping has an easier route to atmosphere.
Neat.
So angle of straw in water makes a difference, obviously, as well as the depth.
Interesting.
So talk to us about depth. Oh no, actually no, that's an AMA that's coming up.
We should just, so what Aisling said was, how much air should leave the straw when we take the straw out of the water, if at all?
Yeah,
so,
and should we be actively blowing out the straw or allowing a bit of air through or no air?
Yes, so in any environment, whenever you're using straw phonation, air is always moving out of the straw. Yeah. If air doesn't move out of the straw, let's say out of water, for instance, because that was more relevant to the question, then the air is going somewhere else, and the only place for that to go is either it's escaping through the sides of the lips or through the nose. In both of those cases, you are completely bypassing the straw, and so you're bypassing the benefits it offers you. So yes, air, it should always be coming out of the straw when you are doing both breathing and phonation based tasks. It should never come through the nose. And there is obviously the consideration then of the flow rate, and essentially how much of this air is coming out. Now, that is a little bit of a harder one to like hone in on, because it really makes a difference with pitch, task, and individual.
And that's another AMA that's coming up.
I know it is, yeah,
have
I know.
another
But
AMA.
that's why we're running this course.
Absolutely.
That's why we're running our course.
Gillian, Oren and I are all doing a course together, which we're going to tell you about later.
Because that's one thing that I've obviously experimented with my own clients, and that's how we work with our teachers, and we want more clarity on that.
There is one thing, because I was having an experiment before we started, and there is one little, it's not even a proviso, but it's an interesting bit of information. If you take a straw and you sing down it and you sing with a clear tone, and you put your hand at the far end of the straw, you don't feel very much. If you do the same volume but you sing with a breathy tone, you feel a lot more airflow against your hand. And I'm wondering if Aisling's question might have something to do with that too, which is, this is about how much the vocal folds are resisting and therefore how clear the tone is.
Yeah, so there's actually, this might answer the question, or might kind of lend some more thought to that idea. Glottal impedance is a huge factor in selecting an appropriate resistance. In essence, you want to match the resistance of the straw to glottal impedance, because then you know the system is balanced and the pressure environments are really efficient and working together. If there is a mismatch, then other things happen, and so you might get high pressure environments or low pressure environments, which you might need to accommodate with other things like the breath or the physicality or the pressure and that kind of thing. So it might be then that it's just a consideration of matching the glottal impedance, which is a complicated thing in itself.
But
Well, I have
having
to say
said
this
that-
makes me very happy,
Yeah.
because it means that the way that I've been working with straws, my instinct has been right.
The interesting thing for me is that you're talking about glottal impedance and airflow. One of the byproducts, or even one of the products of using straw phonation, is that a singer, because a singer is quite keyed into what they're doing usually, a singer will often do that bit of adjustment themselves automatically. And what we found is that, and okay, it's about getting the right size, length, straw, diameter. What we found is that if people are working too hard, that 2 minutes on the straw, and they automatically start to rebalance what they do, which is rebalancing that impedance flow variable. And then if they're not working hard enough, does the same thing happen? I.e., if they've got a really breathy sound, do they then rebalance the other way to get more glottal impedance?
I think actually it's harder to rebalance that way. If you're doing too much, it's easier to do less.
Yes.
If you're not doing enough, it's much more difficult to try and do more, especially if the resistance that the straw offers is also less.
Yeah.
If you were to sort of mismatch and increase the resistance of the straw, it would be much easier to balance things out. So in those situations, it might be that if the person can't really isn't that in tune and can't like really try and manage those things physically, it might be better at that point to play about with the straw to try and rebalance things, and then try and let the body take over and see how that can evolve.
So what you're saying really is that the straw also gives us kinesthetic feedback, because there's so many aspects of voice use that we think we can feel, but we don't actually have, control over. But because it is kinesthetic, it can build that sort of somatic feedback that we need in the somatosensory system.
Yeah, exactly. It's also biovisual feedback, especially when you're doing it with water, because
you can
then
see
you're
the bubbles.
seeing exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
So it does provide a greater awareness to the singer as to it's externalizing the internal sensations, I think.
Yeah.
Nice. I want to go because we're on this subject, which is really brilliant.
Yeah.
I want to go to Jan's question. This is Jan Jinkerson, and she asked this.
Oh, hi, Julianne, Jeremy, and Oren. I wondered if it matters how much water you have in a cup. So, as long as the student knows to perhaps hold the straw at a fairly shallow depth to get least resistance, does it matter if the cup is half full or if it has just a couple of inches of water in it?
Great question.
Very good question. And I think this thought and this idea throws people off a lot. It is not necessarily the amount of water that you have in the cup. It is the amount of water above the straw that matters. So if you're looking for something that is higher resistance, you want to have a greater body of water above the straw. If you're looking for something that is offering low resistance, you want to have a shallower body of water above the straw.
When you say above the straw, you mean above the very end of the straw, don't you?
Sorry, yes.
Yeah. Not that your
Yes.
head is underwater blowing the straw.
Yes,
Just
no,
checking.
exactly. Yes. So the exit point. So the further the exit point is into the water, the greater the resistance you'll get.
Yeah.
So for people that is like, I fill up a water bottle 500 milliliters. That's great, but 500 milliliters ain't going to do much unless you put it right at the bottom, and then you're getting 500 milliliters worth of water weight above you. So it is very much understanding the relationship between depth of water and resistance, as opposed to how full the bottle is or the cup is.
I mean, to be honest...
And that takes us back to the angle of the straw, doesn't it,
Yes.
Oren? Which is, maybe a tip for Jan and her students is to make sure that they're holding, a glass bottle or something like that quite close to them and upright. It's one of the things I quite like about the Dr. Vox here, because everything's angled, so you can do that.
Well, on the Dr. Vox, the top of the tube is angled, but the
Yeah.
bottom of the tube goes straight down into the water.
And they also
The
create
bottom, you'll notice, is cut, right? The bottom of that one is on an angle. It's cut.
Oh, so it
it is.
is. Aha. And so,
We'll actually put a picture of that up
Yeah.
on the show notes.
yeah, because I know Oren's going to be talking about them later.
Yes.
So that's an important thing. All right, should we go to the brass
Well,
questions?
no, I've got another one.
Oh.
No, there are 3 on straws in water. So this is Michelle.
Okay.
Hi, this is Michelle Robinson. I have a question that I feel is quite fundamental when teaching SOVT. Using a straw and water, are we always looking towards consistent airflow across the range? Therefore, if the bubbling increases at the extremes of the register, either higher or lower, is there too much airflow at that point? Thanks very much.
Stunning question.
It is,
Yeah,
yes.
really good question. Again, I think this is something that people get thrown off by, because if we're talking about the stuff that you do with, let's say, the Dr. Vox stuff, in general, there's quite an eruptive bubbling going on. Whereas if you do kind of the more sort of thinner, narrower straw-based stuff, there is a consistent, steady flow of bubbles going on. And so there are a couple of camps to this. I'll put my ideas forward, and then maybe it's the controversial camp. I don't know, but what I tend to say is we're looking for something that matches the task and the pitch, and so I consider it in terms of yes, I want consistent, steady flow of bubbles. Let's say if you're sustaining a single pitch, I would want a nice, consistent, steady flow of bubbles, because that's going to allow us to see whether, you know, as we're getting towards the end of that sustain, whether the body is capable of just, you know, engaging a little bit more to assist in that airflow to keep it consistent. So in those situations, I think consistency is great. As you move up in pitch, I think that consistency needs to be relative to that pitch. The one thing I don't advise is eruptive bubbling. And so there's been quite a few studies on this, and I actually just read a paper the other day which was quite interesting, that was looking specifically at what causes eruptive bubbling versus consistent steady bubbling. And the eruptive bubbling, or they refer to it as chaotic, is just that. The bubbles are so chaotic that the airstream is just doing whatever it wants and there isn't very much control behind it. Whereas consistent bubbling, there is that element of control. And because of that, it's just sort of backtracking and looking, you know, if we're increasing in pitch, phonation threshold pressure also increases. So we need, so that there's basically a need for greater resistance. Now, we know that the speed of the air moving through the straw is also a factor in resistance. So if we're taking a narrower straw that is high resistance anyway, putting it in water that is increasing that resistance, we're getting everything that we need to balance out the phonation threshold pressure. And if we then have eruptive bubbling on top of that, we're then potentially overloading the system with too much pressure, which causes a problem. So going back to then the Dr. Vox stuff, or the other wider tube phonation stuff, you have a naturally bigger tube, which means there's less resistance in it anyway, which means in order to get a greater resistive environment to match the phonation threshold pressure at higher pitches, you might need to increase the speed of the air moving through that system to boost that resistance.
Okay.
So there's a couple of different things, but that's why I think that potentially is an issue, because we don't necessarily want singers to increase the airflow. That's why it's very much, for me, task dependent. It's what does a singer want? What are they getting out of it? And how do we get them there in the best way?
Yes.
I think that's
I think
really relevant.
There's something else as well, which is what type of sound are you making?
Yeah.
Because
that's what's the task?
It's absolutely what's the task. If the phonation pressure threshold in a high soprano classical pianissimo B flat is going to be very different from a rock screamer.
Yes. Yes.
Oren, just because you've mentioned a term very dear to my heart, phonation threshold pressure, for anybody who perhaps isn't familiar with it, do you want to just say a couple of sentences about what it means and why it's so important to both singers and speakers?
Yeah, so phonation threshold pressure, or PTP, is the easiest way to describe it is the minimum amount of lung pressure or subglottal pressure necessary to set the vocal folds into motion. And so it's a really important consideration because if we want to set the vocal folds into motion in the most efficient way, then we very clearly need to try and manage phonation threshold pressure more efficiently. And so when you kind of consider SOVT-based tasks, because you're getting that back pressure reflected down towards the top of the vocal folds, the back pressure is assisting in resisting phonation threshold pressure, so that the loading on the vocal folds is lessened, and so they are freer to oscillate and set into vibration more easily. That is not necessarily relative to where they would have been on the pitches they would have been singing at previously.
I mean, that's essentially that's the purpose of SOVT.
That's my
is to use the back pressure to aid. To release the vocal folds a bit more so that they can vibrate more freely with less pressure.
And balance that P to P. Because, I mean, every singer knows that maybe if they're getting over a cold, or they've been coughing a lot, or maybe they've just been working too hard with their voice, that phonation threshold pressure tends to increase, and what they'll typically report is, I'm having to work harder to make a sound.
Yeah.
And straws are fantastic for that. Thank you for that.
And we love PTP because as a feel thing for a singer, it's like I don't have to work hard and yet I'm still getting the sound that I want.
Because
Hooray.
we will work hard, we will fill up with air and we will blow air.
Can I do one of my hobby horses, please? Subglottal pressure is a combination. It's not just how much air is coming up from the lungs, it's how much is being resisted as well.
Yes.
So that's it's vocal folds and lungs, not just lungs. Thank you.
Cool. All right. You've made your point.
Yes. Okay.
The brass questions.
We have 2 questions. They came in about a couple of months apart, but they're very, very similar. Now, the first one comes from Penny, and she sent this one in completely unsolicited about 2 months ago. She didn't even know that we were going to be doing this.
And we've been hanging on to it
We
since
have
then.
been hanging on to it. Penny didn't actually leave any details, so I can't let her know that she's on here, but hopefully she listens to the podcast.
Hello, I would love to know if playing wind or brass instruments can do the same job for singers as doing softy exercises. I was thinking maybe taking up a clarinet or oboe would do a double job, but I'd love to know the technicalities of that, or if I still would need to do the SOVT exercises with my straw to keep my singing voice well. Thank you very much.
Love that question.
Okay.
And
And we'll listen to the other one as well.
we'll listen to Steve.
Yeah.
Someone once told me that if you want to learn about how to breathe, you should talk to a brass player. As an ex-French horn player, this got me wondering whether brass and woodwind players are at an advantage when approaching singing. Are they constantly working with SOVT when they are playing their instruments? See you soon.
Great.
Okay. There's a lot to unpack here, and I fully admit I don't play a woodwind instrument or a wind instrument,
You don't.
so
I do.
I've never experienced playing one. But I can maybe add some thoughts based on the physics of what's going on. I mean, technically, they would be SOVT devices in that you're occluding how the air is escaping the system. But I think their effect is tremendously different.
Yes.
Tremendously different. In terms of the physics of well, actually, it kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier about the length of the tubes, the contractions and expansions of the tubes. For instance, if you take like a French horn where you've got all these lovely twists and turns and bends and smaller sections and wider sections, then that airflow, if you like unravel all of that, that is a lot of tube that the air has to move through. Yeah. And then it has to move through those expansions and contractions, it's going to create quite a significant pressure drop between the inlet and the outlet. And so based on that, I would say any kind of instrument of this kind is going to provide an insanely high resistance environment. And it might be the type of environment that is obviously very fine to be breathing with.
Yeah.
But I would not advise trying to phonate in that kind of environment.
Yeah.
So yes, that's my initial thoughts on that.
Can I add some stuff? Because I have played most of those instruments.
And I've got a couple of things to say as well.
Yeah. I am an ex-oboist with the emphasis on the X. I actually played oboe as a first study at music college. Oboe, flute, clarinet, saxophone. I was a crap bassoonist. I have also played French horn in a pantomime once, which is my only claim to fame on the French horn. And the answer, first of all, is that with some really weird exceptions, you don't phonate while you're playing. Mm-hmm. So there is no effect on the vocal folds from that point of view because your vocal folds are open to make the sound. There are very few occasions when you do sing while you're playing, and they're usually contemporary classical stuff.
Normally on the flute as well.
Yeah, on the flute you can sing and play, and that's much more prevalent in jazz, and it's much more prevalent in rock for flute players. But then when you take each instrument individually, the oboe has the highest back pressure because of the aperture of the double reed, which is really minute.
So it increases resistance a lot.
Yep. And to the point where, as an oboist, my neck used to swell up a lot because of the pressure that I was having to put down.
And if you're playing a bassoon,
Well, bassoon is a wider reed. This is the interesting
is
thing.
it? It's a
Bassoon
longer
is a
tube,
much
but-
wider aperture, although it's a much longer aperture. It's a much wider reed, and the hole to blow down is bigger.
So actually, that's also a really good point. I think a lot of people don't realise in that this is why I think potentially Tietze was saying earlier that the length of the tube is less important, and that is because for every millimetre of diameter difference, you're getting a 16-fold increase in resistance, as opposed to it's linear with the length. So in that instance, sure, the instruments might be different sizes, but if the diameters are different enough, the resistance will be significant.
Gets pencil, writes down that figure.
There's something else as an oboist as well, and it was something I got very used to, which is we always have too much air. So you take an amount of air in to play a phrase or two phrases or three phrases, and you always have some left over. So you can't even get the air out that's in your lungs. You actually have to stop playing and breathe out before you breathe in. So there's tremendous pressure in there, and it doesn't, for me, because I then got used to having such a big amount of back pressure from the oboe, slightly less from the clarinet, a lot less from the flute because the embouchure is so different. I found that my singing voice was affected, and not well. It was actually affected quite badly because I had so much back pressure that I was used to, that when I came to sing, I was using a lot of closure force to get there. So I would say to
There have been a couple of
Penny-
studies on this.
There have, and there's also, this is anecdotal, it's old wives' tale, but they do say don't play the oboe and sing.
If you want to be a professional singer, they don't advise it. So Penny, continue to use your SOVT
Definitely use
to
the
reset
SOVT.
after
Yes,
playing.
absolutely.
And I think I'd say that as well. My experience of working with people who play saxophone
Yes.
or trumpet, but particularly saxophone, partly because the mouthpiece is so far in. But again, it's really quite a high resistant reed system that you're working with there. And the way that they manage their airflow is often very different. So it's not that you can't, but be aware that it's a different system.
In terms of breathing pattern, I was taught the opposite of splat breathing. I was taught to push out and down when I played.
It's very typical with brass players as well.
Yeah, it is.
which is so counter to the physics of what we need for breathing as well.
I know.
Because if you think about it, to create the high pressure environment that you probably want for those situations, you need to reduce the volumetric space of the lungs.
Yep.
And so to do the opposite of that is crazy.
And I just want to pick up on mouthpieces.
Man after my own heart.
Mouthpieces, because when you look at brass instruments, the mouthpiece is outside, so there is nothing in your mouth. What you're doing is you're creating the pressure using a lip trill, essentially. You are basically playing with a lip trill. And that's how brass instruments make their sound. The moment you go on to reed instruments, you have something that is vibrating inside your mouth. And when you're looking at clarinet and saxophone particularly, but oboe and bassoon to a lesser extent, the mouthpiece is quite far inside your mouth and you're using your tongue tip or sometimes the blade to articulate, which means you're having to pull your tongue backwards to be able to touch that reed and get away from it, which usually means that the tongue is used to being backed in the mouth when you're playing a woodwind instrument. Flute is the exception.
Yeah.
So that also has knock-on effects.
Interesting. Okay.
Okay, geek moment over.
Whoa, that was fun. Well,
That's a good question.
we've got one more
one more
question
question.
from a speech and language therapist.
Hi guys, it's Tor Spence from VoiceFit here, speech and language therapist. Really looking forward to this episode. Thank you for talking about it. So my question is, now that vocal coaches and singing teachers, voice teachers, so many people are using SOVT exercises, and they're also obviously a hugely important part of vocal rehabilitation after injury. How can we ensure that potential voice disorders aren't overlooked and treated by the coach with SOVT without the formal medical examination and treatment?
Oh, such a good question.
I want to start.
Gillian has an opinion on this.
Yeah, I want to start if that's all right. First of all, Tor, thanks so very much for your question, because this is a really, really relevant question at this time. I'm actually going to tell a story from my own past would be 30 odd years ago. As a singing teacher, I had just done my very first Estill course, very shiny and new, because some of you may not know that for a while I was actually a senior Estill trainer, and I was licensed to teach the course. Anyway, this was right at the beginning, and it was, very exciting to find out about things that the vocal folds do, because back in the early 1990s, we didn't talk about this. It was breathe, feel the resonance, and thou shalt never feel anything at the level of the larynx, dear. That's how we were trained. So off I went. I was teaching at the East 15 Acting School, and I had a girl who just started, who had a breathy voice. And I thought, great, I know what to do now. I know exactly what to do. Breathy, vocal folds aren't coming together. So I taught her glottal onsets, and we were very pleased because her voice was less breathy. And first week went quite well. The second week she came back and she said, it's got worse, and I'm uncomfortable. I did a few glottal onsets with her. It wasn't working. I had the good sense to stop and think, okay, there's something going on here, and I don't know what it is. And so I referred her to a voice clinic. That girl had a cyst, and no way were glottal onsets going to be of any use to her at all. Mm-hmm. And I learned from that 30 years ago that no matter how clever you are as a singing teacher, no matter how many facts you might have, no matter that you've learned how to pick up a straw, which comes from voice therapy anyway, you cannot diagnose, you cannot treat, and if you don't know what's going on, if something isn't working, refer on. And I was very fortunate because the Sidcup Clinic, Queen Mary's Hospital, was down the road from me in those days. So I was able to work with Sarah and Tom. This girl received surgery from Tom, and Sarah Harris guided me in post-rehab work. So I see what singing teachers do is always at the level of voice rehabilitation. We don't diagnose, we don't rehabilitate. What are your thoughts?
It's very interesting because actually I completely agree, which perhaps is no surprise. But I think the simplest answer to that question is, I think it's a call for a greater awareness of oneself as a teacher, and to realise that we don't know everything, and that it's okay to not know everything. I think there is this huge kind of fear culture as singing teachers that, if I refer, if I don't know how to treat this, if I don't do this with the singer, then they're going to think I'm a rubbish singing teacher and they'll never come to me again, or somebody else is going to steal my client because they're better at fixing that problem. And I think just let's forget all of that. It's not about us as teachers, it's about the person you're working with. And if we don't have the knowledge and the expertise and the diagnostic capabilities to assist that person, then we need to admit and be honest with ourselves about that and pass that on to the person or the institution or the entity that is capable of doing those things.
I'm going to go one step further.
Sure.
There is no if. As a singing teacher, you do not have the capability to diagnose. End of story. And the reason for that is you don't have an endoscope. You don't have a stroboscope. You actually can't see. You cannot tell different vocal problems by sound.
I've had people with cysts who actually sounded perfectly all right, by and large, except for one or two kind of odd blimps in the range. I've had people with cysts who are very husky and very hoarse. So you can't tell. I think what I'd like to say
just before you go there, there's one more thing, which is, even if you thought you could tell what a particular thing sounds like, that sounds like nodules. That sounds like a nodule. No, there is no such thing as a nodule. They always come in pairs. That sounds like a cyst. It doesn't, because the other thing is, and we've experienced in voice clinics, we've experienced some really complex things that you don't, even if it looks like a cyst on strobe, sometimes there is something else that's underneath it, because you can have really complicated pathologies going on. And also, as a singing teacher, you don't take people's history. There's a sort of ethics and morals thing going on here as well. I think the thing that you can do is to test out. And if you like, this is in essence, this is what Gillian did the first time. She went, "Oh, I've got a great technique, let's do it." Fortunately, she was wise enough when it then didn't work consistently to go, that technique doesn't work. And it's not that the student hasn't been doing it or hasn't been practicing. It's actually that the technique doesn't work and you're dealing with the person in front of you. And then you go, "Well, I've tried stuff out. That doesn't work. I now really need to refer on."
It just didn't sound right, and my instinct said to me, okay, there's something going on here. I mean, I barely knew anything about voice pathology at that time.
I had such a similar experience, actually, just recently. In a client of mine had actually come from, and this is not in the UK, it's in a different country, and I won't give too much of the specifics, but had come from an SLP and ENTs and every kind of medical practitioner who had said to this client that we advise you go and use straw phonation interventions, but we can't offer that to you. It's not part of the frameworks and the procedures that we do. You'll have to go and seek somebody else out. And so that person came to me, and I did take quite a comprehensive kind of, I wanted to know everything she's done previously, everything that she's been told to do. And I kind of based what we were doing on what she had been told to do. And about 3 sessions in, everything was okay because we weren't doing anything too crazy for the first couple of sessions. It was very light, very, very light bubbling, very light work. And for the 3rd session, we did a little bit extra, and I was like, okay, I'm not comfortable with this anymore. There was something like a preventative. Something wasn't working the way we wanted it to work. And I was like, I'm not sure I agree with you being told to just come to any old random person to continue with this. I'm going to refer you on. And so, we followed the advice. And so this is actually an interesting point. Always get a second opinion. Because we followed the advice that she was given by her practitioners. I followed their framework. Something still didn't feel right. I am not comfortable delivering any more teachings because that fell outside of my knowledge of my expertise. And so I've referred her on now to another specialist who I know and trust, and who I believe is going to be able to diagnose more appropriately and then provide a greater sense of intervention. And so that was my little thing. Get a second opinion, please.
I absolutely agree with you. I just wanted to say something, Jeremy, that because I think Tor has really highlighted something that's important for us singing teachers to know. Obviously, we don't diagnose and we don't rehab. But there is a need for singing teachers and voice trainers in general to know, to look for referral markers. So, what are the typical markers? You've just described something, I've just described something anecdotally. Are there typical markers that we can be looking at so that we have a more informed understanding of what to be looking for, to say, I really think you should be seen by a clinician here. Let's go along. I'm going to be happier going if you go to the voice clinic. And we need more cross conversation. Obviously, it's very difficult at the moment because of COVID that singing teachers can't go into the voice clinics, which often they're able to do informally or more formally. So thank you for that question, Tor, and looking forward to hearing more conversations about that. I just want to say that we will be running a course in spring with Cara Garrett, who is a specialist speech and language therapist specialised in voice and a singer. We'll be running a version of My Singer Has a Voice Problem, so look out for those dates. because you might find that helpful in looking for these referral markers.
Can we also highlight the course that we're all doing?
Absolutely.
Which is
Yeah, I just thought I'd drop that one in.
Saturday, November the 21st.
Yes.
10 till 12.
UK time.
Yeah, the SOVT, that's 10 in the morning until midday, not 10 till midnight. And it's 2 hours online with the three of us. We're doing the SOVT workshop. We have some places left on that, although it is already filling up.
I'm hugely looking forward to it.
Yes. What is on your wish list?
Oh my goodness,
for
yes.
2021?
Yes, look at us, we're running, but it doesn't matter. So, what's coming up?
So, what's coming up? I'm getting set to release 4 new attachments for the SOVT straw.
Yay.
Which, I know, Jeremy, we've spoken about this the other day a little bit, but 3 of which I'm very happy to mention now, one of which I can't until we get the patent for it. But one of them essentially is just a connector that's like a J-bend to either allow the singer to position the straw more appropriately when working with water, or to reverse that and then to get the angle right when submerged in water.
Nice.
We're working... the other attachment, actually, that I think is probably most people will be excited about, is a variable resistance aperture. And so it allows the user to dynamically change the aperture to increase or decrease resistance. So as they're, let's say, sliding up in pitch or whatever, they can modify it during those slides if they need to just get a little bit more resistance out of it.
That's
so
fun.
that's currently in the works. I think that will be kind of early 2021. The most, I think, like the biggest project, and I've been working on this. Actually, you've seen this, so I guess working on it since last year sometime. Is another kind of SOVT device, but a lot more, I have to be very careful, elaborate than the current device. And we're currently looking for investment. And so 2021 is going to be our investment kind of outreach year, and so we can complete R&D for that.
So we've heard about this. We're not going to reveal any details at all, but it is incredibly exciting.
And do you think, I mean, obviously maybe it's too early to say, but we know that singers and speakers who have been unfortunate enough to have COVID-19 and who maybe have coughed for months and been intubated are having quite long-term problems in vocal recovery. Do you think that this can contribute in any way to taking those people forward?
So yeah, it was what you saw last year was the first kind of evolution of it. When COVID happened, we pivoted quite quickly to try and adjust what we had to lend aid to people recovering from COVID. We kind of got more into that, and we started seeking partnerships with like Imperial and other kind of universities and institutions that were the very heart of this kind of research. And the trouble is, in order to get something medically verified and validated, it's like a 2-year pathway.
Yeah.
And so we kind of then missed the boat for a medical intervention for helping people recover from COVID, which was the intention at the time. We've now kind of reverted back to offering something for singers that can also be used as an intervention method, but it is not necessarily designed for that. And the reason why we've done it that way is so we can get it to market quicker, which ultimately means we can help more people, even if it is not medically validated. And I would absolutely say we don't endorse anything in particular, but everybody is free to use what we create how they see best for their own recovery. I'm glad I came up with that, because I can imagine, many of us singing teachers in a situation where we have a client who has had difficulties in the recovery process, and we're looking for ways to help them. Cool. I've got one more thing to ask Oren, which is, you are quite young compared with us. You're still in your 20s.
Yeah.
And I mean, frankly, you know, you've talked about what it was like when you had a health challenge. What advice would you give to young people right now who've had their dreams put severely on hold or their dreams smashed?
Or changed.
You know, what advice would you give them to feel that they can move forward?
This is a really tough question, actually, because I don't know necessarily if my advice would change as a result of the pandemic. But the advice I would give to anybody is to find something that you are incredibly passionate about. Pursue that thing, whatever that thing is, with all of your energy and all of the passion that you have, and then find some way to use that thing that you're passionate about to do good in the world, to enrich lives and to make an impact in the universe. And it doesn't have to be big. It just needs to be something that you are passionate about. And so, COVID or no COVID, if you are still passionate about the thing that you did before COVID happened, then keep that passion and find a way to turn that passion into something positive for yourself and then for other people. I think that to me is like the core belief. It is, yes, we're all passionate about the things that we do, and that is great and that is incredible, and I encourage people to really be passionate about the things that they do to enrich their own lives, but then to use that drive to help other people in some way as well.
You're talking about desiring to make a difference, aren't you?
Yeah.
Nice, thank you for that.
I think it's a wonderful place to finish.
It is.
So thank you for that. And we just have some little bits and pieces to wind up with. Sponsored today by the 1 Minute Voice Warm-Up app, because today is Healthy Voice Day. And the 1 Minute Voice Warm-Up app was a joint production with Vocal Process and Speech Tools. Hi, Speech Tools. Hi, Sam and Gary. So I will put the link to that. Course is coming up. The SOVT workshop, obviously, Saturday, November the 21st. Belting and Power Sounds, Saturday the 7th of November, 10 till 12. Now, this is open to people who've done vocal process courses with us, but we are going to be repeating it and opening it to everybody next year. So we'll keep you posted on that. And the M1, M2 workshop is, in fact, the next thing coming up.
And that's full, isn't it? Or...
We have one place left.
Okay, right.
One place left. And for those of you who don't know that terminology, M1, M2 is two different types of vocal fold vibration, or modal and falsetto, or however you want to call it. And we're doing 2 hours just on that, how you find those sounds, how you make them, how you move them.
I had a lot of fun last time.
It was great, great course last time. And I'm going to say to you, look out, we are going to bring on a whole series of 2-hour online masterclasses. We've done 4 of them already as part of our online Singer Teacher training. The feedback has been nothing short of phenomenal.
And that's something we never thought we'd do.
No, but you've heard us talk, now you see us walk. Which is, we actually walk in the talk. This is how we do it. This is how we work with singers. And we always work with other people's singers. So we haven't met them. Yeah. We haven't worked with them. We haven't seen them.
Sight unseen.
Unheard. Unseen and unheard. And then part of the 2-hour masterclass is not just that we work with those people, but we actually discuss why we did certain things and why we didn't do others. So it's the whole business of diagnosis and basically what order we do things in.
So our mission is making a difference to teaching.
It is.
And what about some of Oren's things? Are they going in the show notes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So Oren's own online hands-off SOVT course.
Yes.
Obviously the little booklet.
Yes.
And a couple of things that we've done with you, Oren, which are hosted on there.
And obviously your SOVT straw is going to go into the show notes too.
Isn't there a discount people can get using...
Vocal process discount.
Yes.
Yeah, and is that 10% that they get?
15.
15. Hooray.
Okay. Yeah, we've upped it. Upped it.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So if you go onto Oren's site, which is obi1store.co.uk, I have to tell you, when you told me that the website was obi1.co.uk, I love that link.
No, we were jealous.
Always loved
we
it.
were so jealous.
So obi1store.co.uk, and if you go and put the straw into your basket and put in vocal process, all one word, as a code, then you get 15% off.
Okay.
So, thank you, Oren.
Oh,
it
it's
has
been
been
amazing.
excellent.
A blast.
It's been an hour and a half of just brilliant
Pure
talk.
joy, pure
Yeah.
joy.
So we may end up splitting this into two, or we may do it in one. So we'll let everybody know.
Thank you so much for inviting me to do this with you. It's been so much fun, and I really enjoyed it.
Absolute pleasure.
So thank you so much.
So, and we'll see everybody next time.
Okay.
This is A Voice, a podcast with Dr. Gillian Kays and Jeremy Fisher.